Hi guys, Jane here, and today I actually just want to do a brief overview of what point of view is and the different kinds of points of view. I'm going to go over that a little bit more in depth in a later video, but I know it's something that a lot of writers, especially new writers, struggle with. So I wanted to touch on it. Point of view is who is telling a story, and generally, point of view should be pretty consistent throughout the book. It's pretty jarring to readers if it's not. I recently critiqued a book, and I had said that the point of view changes are jarring, and the issues with point of view in the book were jarring. And the person looked at me and said, well, they use bad language because they're spies. And she didn't understand that I didn't mean the character themselves, but the changes and issues with their consistency of point of view. So I do think it's really important to understand that point of view means, and if somebody is telling you the point of view shifts are jarring or there's issues with head hopping or anything like that, those are point of view problems. So there are 4 types of point of view. I'm going to start with one that is rarely used, and that is second person. Second person is what you would find in the Choose Your Own Adventure books from when you were a kid. My kids read these right now, and they're fun, but they're very much the you go and do. You go to the closet, you open the door, this is what you see. They're not used very much because it's hard to tell a story in second person. You probably can do it in short fiction, and it is used sometimes in literary fiction. But, and again, like I said, choose your own adventure books, but it's not something that we see in novels for the most part. The hardest thing about it is it's hard for a reader who you're telling what they're seeing and experiencing and thinking to get into the role, because that may not be at all what they would think or feel or see. Again, as a teenager or child, you can get away with it a lot more for that kind of grade for writing because they are more able to have that imagination and they're not going to push back as much. But as an adult reader, you might be like, you think about this, and I'd be like, but I would never think about that, and my immersion is broken. And my immersion being broken is a huge problem in a story. So second person is not usually used. Another one that is used, or another point of view, but one that is used pretty frequently, is first person point of view. First person point of view is anything where the character of the book is telling a story. Now, they may be telling a story about a different character. For instance, in The Great Gatsby, it's Nick who's telling about Gatsby. In the Sherlock Holmes, it's Watson who's telling the story about Sherlock Holmes. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the protagonist telling the story, but it is a character in the work of fiction telling the story. This can be through letters. It can be them just sitting there telling the story. It can be through journal entries. There's a lot of different ways to do first person. One of the things to consider is sometimes people want to add a lot of first person point of views in a story, and generally that's a bad idea. If you're going to do first person, you want to generally do 1. If you're really, really risky, you can do 2. I actually tried doing that with one of my novels, Singing the Last Song, and I would not recommend it. I really think 2 first-person narrators is a bad idea, and I just don't think it should be done most of the time unless you have a very good reason. Because it's jarring and it's hard to keep track of who's who. And as a writer, it's challenging because you really have to watch voice. You really have to differentiate the voice of the characters, because when you step into a first-person book, the character voice is really important, and it has to be consistent. And if you have 2 characters telling the story, but their voice sounds the same, the words they're using, the ideas they're expressing, things like that, it's really confusing, like, to the reader, who am I listening to? And you don't have a lot of names yet. It's hard to remember the first person narrator's name because they're not going to say their name consistently. They're going to just be like, I, me. The last kind of POV is third person, but there's actually two sections to third person. And I've heard it called different things. I've heard close third person and far third person, and I've also heard it called limited and omniscient. I like limited and omniscient better, so I'm gonna use those. So third person limited is kind of similar to first person in that we only follow one character at a time, and we know what's going on in that with that character, their thoughts, their feelings, their ideas, what they see, but we're limited to what is happening to that character, what that character knows, what that character can see. Omniscient is where the story is being told by an all-knowing narrator. This narrator knows everything about the past, present, future, and what is happening to the characters in the story. And they see the things that are going to be important, like these characters are meeting on the hallway. 5 years from now, Roger would look back and realize that that was the most important moment of his life. But for that, in this moment, he was just annoyed that she tripped over him. You know, whatever. Omniscient isn't used very much these days because it's hard to get really immersed in the story. It's hard to get close to the characters because it's told more like a fairy tale fantasy from our childhoods, like the once upon a time, and not so much like this is happening and it's immediate. So those are the different points of view, and again, I'm going to do videos going into each of them a little more deeply, but I did want to explain for anybody who's kind of new to writing what point of view is, and when people say your point of view is off, that's what they're meaning. They're meaning you're going from one point of view to another, or you're not writing a particular point of view properly. Like you may act like you're in third person limited, and then all of a sudden you're giving information about the past that this person wouldn't know, or the future. And of course, unless they are an oracle, they can't see the future. You also might be head hopping and saying, you know, you're in Sally's point of view, but suddenly she knows all this stuff about Sharon that has never been told to her. I was doing a critique recently of somebody's work, and this was a huge problem they had. They would say that this other character had this motive, but there was no way they could know that. And I put that multiple times. I said, how do you know? How does your character know? Because in third person limited and first person, you only can know certain things. So it's really important for reader experience to maintain a point of view throughout a story, to be consistent. If you are using multiple points of view, to make sure your readers are aware that you're doing this. I've read books where a part is told in first person and then a part's told in third person, but it's always clarified and really clear and consistent. Like that doesn't, if I've enjoyed it, it hasn't come up as a surprise to me. It's always been like, okay, so starting at the first chapter's in first person, second chapter's in third person, and this was a mystery, and it was the good guy and the villain, and they alternated that way throughout the book, and that was fine. But you have to be consistent, and you have to be consistent once you are in your point of view to write it properly. So if you're in first person, and again, we're going to talk a lot more about this, but if you're in first person, you need to be in first person. You can't know all about why Susie over there is doing the things that she's doing unless she has told you, or unless you've read her diary, or unless there's a good reason you know her motivation. You can only say, well, I assume this, but you can't know it. All right, guys, I hope that's been a helpful overview of point of view. Please like and subscribe, and I'd love to hear your comments. See you next time. Bye.